Hello, everybody, and welcome to this very special English-speaking panel dealing with game collections, game preservation, and game archives and museums around the world. We are here live in Teams, chatting with our experts from around the world. We also have some pre-recorded recordings from other museums in Korea, Japan, India, for example, and we will be looking at those during the day as well. But first of all, I would like to very much thank our panelists for taking the time to attend here. I know it's very early morning in or nighttime in the United States, and it's a very special thing for us still to have our guests attend live. And I think we will start with the introductions. So in the panel now we have 5 speakers, and we will start with Henry Lowood, who could be called the grand old man of game preservation. You've been working quite a long while with game preservation issues as the Harold C. Hochbach curator at the Stanford University, responsible for the history of science and technology and film and media collections. I hope I got that approximately right. It's quite a title, but Henry, please, if you would like to talk a little bit about your work at Stanford and maybe show us some highlights from your collections, and we also have some images that will be running in the background as you speak.
Sure. Yeah, as you said, I'm the Hochbach curator at Stanford. I am the head of a unit in the Stanford Libraries called the Silicon Valley Archives. Is the sound all right? I'm getting a little bit of an echo. I'm just wondering if the sound is okay.
I can hear you just perfectly.
Great. Oh, okay. I had a unit called the Silicon Valley Archives. That has been going now for, my goodness, almost 40 years. The focus of the collections is the regional development of technology and entrepreneurship and all the impacts that Silicon Valley has had on this region and of course extending out to the world. Games are a big part of that. Games along with other kinds of software and many other technologies. I think it's true that I'm just going to say it's true, and somebody can contradict me if you know otherwise, that Stanford acquired the first, as an institution, Stanford was the first institution to acquire a historical software collection, the Cabernetti collection. That was in 1998. That collection was primarily games. So games from the early 1970s to the early 1990s, electronic games. So we've been doing this quite a while. In fact, we're still working on preservation issues and access issues associated with that original collection, the Cabernetti collection. I'll say just 2 other things and then I'll stop. The first is there maybe the 2 distinctive things about what my situation would be that number 1, I'm at a university. So that means that the community I work for is more the research and instruction communities first at Stanford, and of course externally as well. We aren't as much of a public-facing institution as some of the others represented here today. And the second is that I'm in a library, not a museum. So as you can see from the image there, our focus is on documentation. Our collections are heavy on archival collections related to the history of games, photographs, media that relate to games, things like that. We do have software collections, we do have artifacts, but for example, we don't collect arcade cabinets because we really can't, there's not really a way for us to exhibit them easily, and it's not really a research friendly sort of thing in our context. We're more focused on archives, and I know some of you in museums also have archives as well, but for us that's the principal focus. We do, as you see in the in the photo there. We do have an exhibit space associated with the Silicon Valley Archive, so we do exhibits. They are open to the public. We do have that, but it's secondary for us, whereas it might be primary for some of the other institutions here today. Maybe I should just stop there and let you move on to the next introduction.
Thank you so much, Henry. That was really interesting, and we move on, and I think we could move on to Andrew Borman, who is at the Strong in New York, and I just heard it's 5 a.m. there, right? So thank you so much for coming and joining this panel.
Absolutely, thank you for having me. So as you mentioned, I am at the Strong National Museum of Play in Rochester, New York. We are a collections-based museum that focuses on the ways that we aren't a video game museum, so we focus on play as a whole and how that encourages learning, creativity, and discovery, and how it illuminates cultural history. So video games for us are a piece of what we do here rather than an entire thing on its own. So the museum itself is 285,000 square feet today, just to give an idea of the size. And we're adding 90,000 square feet at the end of this June. We're opening an expansion that is largely focused on video games. So that's really exciting. Before we get too much into the museum, I'll mention as the digital games curator, my job is primarily to build the collection of digital games, things that are being created today or in more recent video game history, which is always interesting because video games are such a young medium compared to some of the other things that you may hear about. But I also work on the preservation of the physical games in our collection as well, knowing that we want to keep the games accessible not just today, but 50 years from now, 100 years from now. What is that going to look like? How can we do that to make sure that we're not just collecting floppy disks that have nothing on them? That doesn't really serve anybody. So we're home to the World Video Game Hall of Fame. Our Women in Games initiative is absolutely incredible, focusing on stories that really haven't been represented in video game history. And that will be a big part of our expansion as well. To give an idea of the size of the collection, which is perfect timing, we have about 550,000 objects in the museum, everything from the tiniest doll shoe through video games, board games, RPGs, to even our carousel is actually, I think, our largest object at this point. About 60,000 of those are related to video games in some way. So that's everything from the games themselves and the hardware to things like statues, to action figures that are related to video games. Among those are 350 arcade and pinball machines, but then we can really start to dive into things that I think really make us unique in terms of we have prototypes of arcade games from companies like Atari, some of which you can experience in the Atari 50th anniversary collection, where we have one of two of the cabinets for Maze Invaders, which was never released. Now we're working with game companies to give back to make things more accessible in really unique ways. We also do have a library with over, I think, 225,000 volumes of books, trade catalogs, research papers, and that sort of thing. But then we also have company archives and smaller archival collections that really make up the whole history of play. But to focus on video games today, that includes what was left of the Atari coin-op division when they shut down. We have company collections from Broderbund. We have a great collection from indie games that we're really trying to grow right now, especially American-made indie games. We have collections from people like Carol Shaw and Joyce Weisbecker to talk about our Women in Games initiative, collections from Midway, companies like Microsoft, and many, many other individuals. We don't have enough time to get into all of them right now, but I'll highlight one object that I think is really interesting. We actually have the only known copy that's known to exist of the Super Mario Brothers 3 prototype that what would become id Software had created before jumping into Commander Keen, and then, of course, eventually Doom, which is a really exciting piece. So I think I've talked enough. The museum itself has been around since 1982 when we opened to the public, and we continue to go strong today. So thank you again for having me, and congratulations.
Thank you so much, Andrew. It's very, very interesting to hear about your collections as well. And I think we move on with the introductions. We still have two institutions to go. And now we come to Europe this time, to the Computerspielemuseum in Berlin, which has also existed for quite a while. I remember when we were planning the Finnish Museum of Games back in the day, we visited and were very excited to see the collections and the exhibitions that you have on show. But now this time we're joined by Nicole Hanisch and Martin Görlich from the Computerspielemuseum, and maybe you could, or we will actually start by showing a short video of your exhibition space. It's a roughly 1 minute video, and we will start looking at that now. So we saw the video. There was some technical issue on my side, but I hope you can hear it and see it just fine in the Twitch stream. But we move on, and now would be a nice opportunity to also to hear about Nicole's and Martin's work at the museum. And maybe, I don't know, did you decide in which order you want to go? Who introduces themselves first? If not, maybe we start with Martin.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Martin. I'm CEO, so it's more an administration part of the museum, and I'm in the museum from 2013. But the museum is much older. We started in 1997, so we celebrated or not celebrated last year because it was a very difficult year. 25 years of the museum. We are a non-profit museum, but a private one, so it makes some decisions harder, or some parts of the work are a little bit more complicated. And maybe now Nicole, and afterwards I will say maybe some more words about the museum.
Hi, my name is Mikko Heinosen. I'm project manager at the Computerspielemuseum. I'm also responsible for researchers who are coming to the museum and want to have access to the archive. At the moment, it's mostly PhD researchers or a bachelor student who is doing a work about controllers. So we are helping them as best as we can with our archive, with our exhibition and our knowledge. So yeah, I think Martin can go on about the history of the museum.
Thank you. I will show some pictures of the museum again to maybe not to have to see my face for that all the time. We are a very interactive museum. We are located in the center of Berlin, or a little bit more eastern part. We are a private-owned museum, which is non-profit. You can see at the entrance the building has a history. It's a part of the old eastern part of Berlin with the GDR, and it was called the Café Warschau, which is also very important for us to show some GDR games or GDR arcade machines in our exhibition, which we see maybe a little bit at the end. We are more interactive than maybe other museums, and we have also arcade machines. We are trying to show some maybe more smaller games, also something which you maybe didn't catch in the last 20, 40 years or in the computer games history. And we are also trying this very often in showing it in temporary exhibitions in our museum. We have a great hardware wall, which we are very proud of. So we are showing some unique gaming machines or consoles which are more not so often seen, but we are also showing some old stuff like the Pong arcade machine, which is always the same in every tour. Which you have the small details which can explain how it started and what's important with games. Like it has to be accessible, and Pong is the first example which you can show very easy how it has to be done to be accessible. We have temporary racers now. We have, but we have also some art, and this is a special one. It's the Paint Station. It's one of our famous game machines which we have. It's not easy to handle, and you have to really decide if you want to play it. It's basically Pong, but at the end you get punished if you don't play right, or maybe if you want to get some points, because for every punishment you get a point. But we have also some new stuff, old stuff. To the left we see the arcade machine from the GDR, the Polyplay. And we have in our archive more than 40,000 games, 12,000 magazines, and as Nicole said, we are always willing to take in researchers which are trying to find out new stuff about the games, and we also try to educate. We have a lot of children or school classes which are come to the museum, and we are hoping to try to reach everybody and say that the gaming culture is very important, and it's an everyday culture. So everybody experiences like 50% of the population in Germany is playing in some kind of way. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole and Martin. Really interesting to hear about your work at the Computerspielemuseum. And I guess last but not least, we have a panelist from Estonia, from Tallinn, Camille Laurelli from the LVLup, which is part of the National Library in Estonia, and we had the chance to meet up in last autumn and chatted about game museums and game collections. And now it's very interesting to hear about your work, and I see you are sitting in the middle of your exhibition.
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation. Is the picture is correct? I see it's a bit. Maybe I can.
We can see it just fine. Thank you.
There is delay. Sorry. Okay. So yes, I'm French. We are in Estonia, but I moved a few years ago, and so the museum was created in 2018. We started in a factory called Arsimaya. It's a bit like abroad from the center, but it's pretty much in close to the center. With my colleague Andrzej Wojciechowski, who's not there. We, of course, so you can yes, exactly. So that was like how the museum started. So it was an old metal factory, Soviet factory that was was not working anymore. So as I used to have a studio in the building, and with discussion with the owner, we managed to get the place to build this idea of the museum. But this idea came out. So now we are working at the National Library for many reasons, as this came out from the COVID period, while the financial situation was too hard, as we are not. It was like independent initiative, and we didn't have any financial support. So everything was made mainly from what we could do. So usually the furnitures were found on some, like, people getting rid of their things, cooperation with second-hand shops and things like that. But as well, the idea of the museum came also, and then the library came out. We had some opportunity to talk with the library, as probably they could do something, as there is a big project of renovation of the historical building. So currently we are in the space of the museum. Maybe I see like it's a bit, no, not this way, like turn a bit more like this. Is it too much? Yes, it's too much. As there is a delay on the camera, so I can't manage to see. So it's a very small space now, but we are supposed to move in 2025 in the new renovated building. where the space will be about like 150 square meters. But the idea of this museum came out from the fact that during Soviet time and post-Soviet period, most of the video game history was made from copy, bootlegs, clones, forgeries from already existing systems that was usually built in America, in Western Europe, and Japan. And because most of that systems were not part of this market, because video games is before to be whatever art or I don't know, it's a product. And whatever was out of this market doesn't exist. So here I took with me actually to show you. I wanted to show you some elements that that are provided by us for the audience. So of course we have the main renowned systems of like Mega Drive, Super Nintendo, or over machines. I cannot take, of course, the list. We don't have like I don't have an exact amount of machines that we have in the storage and the machines that we are providing here, as is shifting constantly. And but for example, I could start like it was mentioned before. So this is an original clone of Pong that was made by Electronica. So Electronica during Soviet Union was not a company, it was not more like an organism related to Ministry of Technology during Soviet Union. So they used to build everything that was electronic, like a TV, cash machines, calculators, and so a Pong system. So there is only 5 different models was released, and as well, like to get access to it, you usually need a high position in Soviet regime to expect the paper authorizing you to buy it in a shop. So basically, you had the possibility to exchange such this machine for a house, for example. So that was very special. Then was produced this kind of electronic games that probably you have seen somewhere. So this one is very close to the Mickey Mouse electronic game that was made by Game & Watch, but this is Nu Pogodi. So Nu Pogodi was a very famous Soviet cartoon that they inspired. So at first I thought that it was a clone of Egg. That Egg was the second model of the Mickey Mouse version with a wolf, but actually it's an absolutely different character. That it's just a coincidence. We have as well, like as you. A few part for microcomputers that I, of course, I will not develop much, but for example, the ZX Spectrum was extremely popular, but not this model especially, but the most known one was this one. So that was like clones of ZX Spectrum. I think, I don't know if the picture is precise, but give an idea. I can show for some people how it looks like behind. I quickly show some more models. This is another clone of Soviet Spectrum. And here I have another one. This one is very nice as well. ZX Spectrum as well. Then in the early 90s started to be produced this Tetris game that is called Brick Game. So this is extremely popular here. So usually when you have people coming there, they come for Nu Pogodi, or they came for to see this brick game. It was pretty clever in a way. Probably you have seen, because I remember that in France, a few of my friends used to have this one, but it was like when you couldn't get a Game Boy, you could get this kind of things. It was pretty clever because like there was built-in games inside. You had car games, shooter games, platform games, and all the graphics was made from Tetris blocks. So very cheap, but pretty clever in a way. But the masterpiece is actually, where did I put it? The masterpiece, yes, is the Dandy. So the Dandy was a clone of the Famicom, but was produced right after Soviet Union collapse, so 10 years later. So the history is interesting that when Nintendo found that out, it was too late. That Stepler already produced millions of them. So Stepler was a Russian company that produced this this machine. So it's a just classic 8-bit system that you used usually yellow cartridges that you could find in flea markets when you were lucky that there was a plastic around the ship. It's really compatible with as well Famicom. You can read it on a Famicom easily, as you can play any kind of Japanese game on the Dandy. But as it was not, so the funny part is that the machine, I think many people used to play this machine until the market was open for Sony, for example, and people played it, I think, until PlayStation 2. PlayStation 1 was too expensive, and usually you could find it was a bit, it became popular because there was a lot of pirate games, of course, but you had to buy it, you were buying pirated games for the price of an original game, so it was not popular as it was abroad. But I want to show you very quickly as well few super models of Dandy. So here, this one was very popular, so it's a Famicom as well, a Famiclone. This one has very special shape. You had as well a Mega Drive Famicom. So it's a Famicom as the shape of a Mega Drive, was very popular. Later on, you could find as well like Famicom, like looks like the PS1. But it was always the name was changing. Like for example, this Famicom is called Argo Station. But all the games, so it was funny because like it was sold as this new machine, you are compatible with your. It's like there is a retro compatibility with your previous games. But later on, started to be sold this kind of machines. So that was the last generations of Dandies. So it was almost like a kind of microcomputers, but it's a Dandy. It was just they included a keyboard, but you had like the slot part for the games. So the funny part on this one, I plugged one, as you can see here. So I don't see I'm not sure I put that, but I'm not sure how far this is.
Yeah, we can. I think we can see perfectly fine.
Okay.
Really interesting machines. Do you want to still show some images from that one? Yes.
Yes, I will show you. So it's funny because like on this one, so of course you had the mouse. We don't have time to show you the mouse because it was sold as well with software systems for like Word or like clone of Word or Excel. It's very funny. So here I put this kind of cartridge, and actually you can use the keyboard itself as the controller. So you have the A and B button, and you have the D-pad there. You have the power button. So this is it's very funny. Like it's a multi-cartridge, multi-games cartridge. Here it's Contra 6. So all the games, of course, you have as well, like Mario 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, a lot. And this one is very funny because, like, if you start the game, if I manage it, so yeah. So on this version of Contra, you can choose Bill, Rambo, Ryu, and Guile. And yes, and then it's working like any kind of regular Famicom. So you have the A button, B button, and of course you had slot if you want to put controllers. So this was for I can very briefly I will show you how you could use as well these machines, because there was the mouse, but I think yes you can control it from here. So A, how it's enter. Yes, A. So here is a multi-cartridge with some softwares. So here, as you can see, it's Word version 1.2. So and then you can write with your keyboard. But here it doesn't work. Probably the keyboard on this version is not working properly. It's not working. But you had as well like clones of. So that's another kind. So here it's called the Victor. So that was exactly the same kind of system. You had as well like a clone of Mega Drive that was possible to find, and you could get like really interesting games on it. Like here we have Alien 3 with a Predator as on the cover. You could play Assassin's Creed on Mega Drive, but on the back it's Dragon's Lair. You had Super Mario on Mega Drive as well. That's the funny design of Prince of Persia for Mega Drive. The covers are really something special as well. For Mega Drive, here I have few samples, and I will probably finish with that. Here we have like Asterix, and it's funny because in the back of the cover, it's actually screen. It's photography of the CRT working. I have one which is there is for Mega Drive, Donkey Kong 99. I don't know if we see clearly. This one is pretty clear with the visuals of the. So it's a photography from the directly took on the CRT to make the cover. Here we have a very nice Ghostbuster. We have like the Rampage edition of Jurassic Park 2. There was the one, of course. So, but they are exactly the same game. Here, this one is nice as well. That was the kind, so it was multi-games cartridge. And it's funny because the Michael Jackson game is called Dangerous Tour. So probably it was Moonwalker. So yes, so that's the kind of things that are interesting us as most of these materials that was very popular here are disappearing now, and it's very hard to have them back.
Thank you. Thank you, Camille.
And, yes, and now the work that we do at the library is thinking about the legal deposit of contemporary video game developer companies to have access to these goods. So I hope I was not too long. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Really interesting stuff about the pirated games, especially, and that's something that we might get back to later on in the program. But thanks so far. Really interesting introductions. I feel it's 4 institutions here in the panel, and all of you are kind of different. And I guess the chat is also. I can see there's some comments on the chat as well. That is really interesting to get to know these different institutions around the world, and there's some questions about the pirated games especially. So maybe we get back to that. But before we move on, I think now is a good opportunity if the panelists have some questions to each other about the institutions that you have just presented. Is there something that you want to know more about? Maybe not. Then we move on. Yes, sorry, Martin.
Yeah, I would be very interested in Andrew and the work on modern games, how they, because it's also a legal problem in Germany, how to get a game which is now published on a streaming platform, on gaming platform with DRM and other security measures, and maybe also not the willingness of the people who are publishing it to get it as a copy on a disk, on a drive, and how they are archiving it on a server, or maybe is it a floppy disk, or is it a magnet disk for every game, and that's why they need so much space. I don't know how they are doing it. Maybe get some information about that would be very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So obviously digital games are such a big part of what gaming is nowadays. So it's a huge problem with no one solution for every single situation. You know, we're lucky in the sense that we have the ability to buy things. We do receive donations every year, obviously, but we can just go out and buy the material that we need. So that's a big part of how we're just acquiring digital games, just like somebody else would. But there's still issues around long-term preservation of those games. As a museum in the United States, where we have certain exemptions to what is the Digital Millennium Copyright Act here, that allows us to do certain acts of preservation legally. And that includes basically going around DRM specifically for single player games. We don't currently have the ability to go out and recreate World of Warcraft or for one that's not around Motor City Online or a game like that. But we do have the ability to do a lot of the things that, even a pirate community would, in the sense that we can just back things up in whatever way, shape, or form that we can. That goes everything from cartridges. I have a ton of cartridge readers and that sort of thing, to the digital games. That doesn't necessarily solve the long-term issues of preservation around digital games. Unfortunately, that's going to be a team effort. I think where we're most successful in digital games today is working with developers. That can be the limited publishers that are publishing indie games on physical formats. I, of course, love to have a physical format of a game when they exist. But then it's also talking to the developers themselves. Will they provide us a version without DRM? Are there things that we need to be aware of that are going to be an issue, things that we may not think about? There's certain games out there, for instance, that use voice recognition in the game, that use that need the online services not just as a DRM feature, but actually as a feature of the game. So think about if it's using the Facebook APIs to do that voice recognition. When those disappear, what is going to be left? And unfortunately, the answer is that we're not going to be able to preserve a playable thing for every single game that exists. If that is our goal, we've already failed. There's already games that are no longer playable. And while a game like World of Warcraft will have a ton of fans looking to preserve it, the other game I mentioned, Motor City Online, the only way to play that was a debug version that some person on the internet happened to find, that's piracy at that point. That isn't a preservation thing in the same sense. So not every game is going to receive equal attention, unfortunately. So what is it that we can do beyond just the preservation of a physical game or a playable game, be it digital or physical? And that's where we start to look beyond the games themselves. That's where we look at our libraries, our library here, to preserve magazines, articles, that sort of thing, because that's going to be really important. That's where we look to our archives to show how games were made. That can include things like the source code, game documentation, all that goes with that. So even if we can't play the game, we have some representation of what that game was. On my end, I'm actually sitting in a brand new preservation and research lab where researchers who are coming to the museum can play all sorts of games. But it's also an area where we can record video using the latest in technologies, because we think video is going to be increasingly important, especially 20 or 30 years from now, as the original hardware starts to die. As great as emulation is, it's still emulation. It's not the original thing. It's not the original interface. So how is it that we can preserve some record of what that was? Because even if we preserve a game, that doesn't mean we're going to have a computer to play the game on. So all of those things are really capturing how we're preserving games. Obviously, we would love to have a playable version of every game that we possibly can. But we really, to be realistic, you need to look beyond that. And I think when you combine all those things, that is how we'll have the most complete picture of what games are, especially today.
Thank you. It's a very interesting concept. It's not interesting. For us, it will be a barrier which we have to breach, still have to breach. It's not yet there. We are still on a focus. It has to be playable. It has to be on the original consoles. It has to be, we have to show it like the people who saw it the first time, which is, it's getting complicated. We are now in the problem of the CRTs. They were thrown away 20 years ago and standing around every corner on the street, and nobody wanted them anymore. And now we have to look and really scratch the barrel to get them somewhere.
Yeah, we're in a similar situation too, in the sense that, obviously people want to come and see it in the original, but you have to plan for that future. So we do have an arcade as well, where those CRTs are really important. We were able to purchase a bunch of the kind of last run of arcade CRTs that will help keep our games going. But 50 years from now, then what? So yes, we're focused on what it is today, how original can we keep it. But we also have to think about the future and how to do that in a way that is friendly to the objects, which is actually a big thing what this lab answers is, can you replace parts on an Xbox and call it an Xbox still? we want to keep our original hardware as original as possible. So everything in here are not museum objects anymore. So that can help us keep things accessible into the future.
The one question to the CTR, when I can follow it up, how do you see the point that can you still use an CTR which is not the same as the first versions, which are curved, and the later ones were flat, and it doesn't have the same finesse like the first one or the old school look? Do you see it still as an option to say I put it on a more modern CRT inside? And the second one would be, do you follow up the idea to repair CRTs, or you say it's not worth it, it's not possible, or it's this also will die?
We repair CRTs as much as humanly possible. We have a full-time arcade conservation technician who works underneath our conservator, who works on kind of the general museum objects, including video games. So our number one goal is to repair. We don't want to replace unless we have to. Unfortunately, there comes a point where there is no repair. You can rejuvenate the tube, you can replace all the capacitors. Sometimes the CRT has nothing left. And that's where we have to have a discussion. We'd like to keep it as original as possible. If we can find the same model, the same tube, the same whatever to put into it, that's our preference. But we also do have that stock of newer CRTs that we can use if we have to. They're generally not the same, as you're mentioning. You know, we want to keep them as close as possible. A flat screen CRT is very different, but that's something that as time goes on, we'll probably have to address more and more. But it's also our mission also includes the preservation of those things. So we do have to repair them, but we're also keeping conservation logs just like you would a classical art painting. If something has changed, we want that to be noted. So again, 50 years from now, there is no confusion. We know that this isn't the original CRT model that was in there, and that's all logged. We follow conservation standards. Everything is reversible. And actually, there's occasions, very rarely, where if we get something in that's been converted to an LCD or something like that, usually done pretty poorly, we'll actually go through the trouble of finding a CRT that works in that. Very rare. That's only happened once or twice while I've been here. But we do want to find that balance of keeping the object and its history, but also respecting the game of what it was. So we aren't going to necessarily paint over cigarette burns on something, but we're trying to have the best experience that we can that respects the original.
Thank you so much. I noticed the conversation is already soaring around different topics, but I would also like to introduce our remote or pre-recorded participants here, and we have a couple of videos that we could watch. First is the video from the Embracer Games archive, which is fairly new in Sweden. It was just opened a year ago, and we have a pre-recorded interview with David Borström and Natalia Kovalainen from that institution. I think we come back to these questions after the video, but thanks so far to everybody.
Hello, this is David and Natalia from the Embracer Games archive. We have the great luxury to be working at the video game archive, and we are very, very happy for that. And today we will introduce you a little bit to the archive of what we are doing. So Embracer Games archive is a part of the Embracer group, and it's an archive for physical video games and the gaming system that you play them on, computers, game consoles, and so on, and also for the accessories. So physical games that were commercially released for stores. Just not older games, but also newer games. We want the whole scope, so to say. And the archive is not only for Embracer, it's for the whole video game industry. And also we want to help out researchers, journalists, maybe author writing a book or something, and also schools and teachers. We actually had a school here some weeks ago, and that was very, very nice. And for the whole video game industry, so to say. And we want the games in the archives to come to use, not just be standing in a shelf, so that we really want to share the games and the consoles and the accessories that we have in the archive, so that they can come of use and help the industry in some way. So I am the CEO. I have been given the honorable task to lead the work with building up this archive. So I'm very happy for that. And we have, during the last year, acquiring all the shelves that you see behind Natalia, and we have ground sorted all the games and start building the framework for the database, creating a home page and so on, and taking care of visitors. So we had a busy first year, but we really love it. And here we have Natalia.
Yes, and I am the chief archivist here at the Embracer Games archive. And I, just like David, one does a lot of things, but my main role is to be the one that sets how we're going to work with the archive, how we're treating all the items, how we're handling them, how we are cataloging them, and so on. So that's my main role here. Yeah, number-wise, yeah, just as David said earlier, we have our main focus are physically released games for the home market, and all the consoles and the computers and accessories needed to play these items. And at the moment, we have around or over 50,000 items, which is quite a lot to start with, we think, because now when we're going to start cataloging, we have to start with 50,000 items. So it's quite a mountain, but we really look forward to it. But the collection contains lots of what we think of now as complete collections of some released games for some consoles. David is the expert on this at the moment. Which ones we have? We do have my personal favorite, which is something that most people don't get that excited about, but some do, is that we have a complete Japanese Neo Geo AES collection in the archive, and I think that's incredibly beautiful to look at and to awesome games to play also.
So we have a lot of complete sets, as Natalia says. For example, Nintendo Entertainment System, Famicom, Dreamcast, GameCube, Nintendo 64, and so on. So we have a good starting point. And also the archive consists of 3 big personal collections, you can say, Natalia, that we have acquired. For example, there's a big collection from Austria. That guy had collected for over 30 years. So his whole basement were filled with games and consoles and computers. And he felt that he was done. He felt more like the collection was owning him than he owning the collection. So that's a great starting point for us, because he had so many hard to find variants of consoles and computers that we're very happy to have in the archive. So we have a good starting point. The archive is located in Karlstad, Sweden, and our premises is quite big right now. You can see the shelves behind Natalia, and we also have, of course, an office where I'm sitting in right now, and we have a bigger entrance room that we will actually be building right now, that we will have some kind of what's it called? A visitor area.
Exhibition, yeah.
Exhibitions,
smaller
yes.
exhibition.
Like a mini small museum and exhibition of the items, some of the items that we have in the archive, and also some working stations for our new archive assistant that will put the games into the database. And also we have a nice, we call it like a campfire, like a meeting place. It's like a round table with chairs where we can sit down when we have visitors, and also when we have meetings. And we will be totally surrounded by games. So it's a great meeting place and a good place for inspiration. Have a good talks with people in the industry who comes to visit us. Yeah, we have a lot of things to show. So the question should be easy, but when we get this question, it's so hard. But what should we take? But today we have chosen. It's a complete collection of the Game & Watch games. So this is just one box out of 6 boxes, and this person collected not only one variant of every game, he wanted all of the variants, but we are not 100% sure if we got every variant, but many games were released in different versions depending on which country, and the names is not the same, and Game & Watch is called pocket size game or so. Here we have some examples of a Donkey Kong game looking different depending on which region you're wearing. Yeah, just digging through this box is it's amazing, and we're really looking forward. We haven't had the time yet to go through this box. Actually, we have just lifted up some games at the top, but this collection of complete set of Game & Watch, I think it's really, really amazing, and we are very happy to have this in the archive.
Because we see that having a collection of things gives context to another. Like one game gives context to another game, so it gives something more than to just have one special item. Sometimes actually seeing them together is the special thing, is the uniqueness. And one thing that we haven't really talked about that is also important is that we're not just aiming to have one version of every game. Our aim, even though we know it's very hard to achieve, is to have a copy of each physical release of the game. So one game might exist in multiple languages or multiple type of releases, and we would really want to have all of them. And that's, we know it's a big aim and it's a big goal, but it's good to have big ambitions.
We want to have as extensive archive as possible.
Yeah.
So the mission will be lifelong. It will never ends, probably.
And I would like to start with Henry. How does this sound? What do you think about the Embracer Games Archive, and especially maybe their idea about collecting full collections? Do you think that's important, as they said?
Well, it's kind of interesting that they call it an archive. I guess I would draw the distinction a little bit differently. I think of the game collections, which are important, of course, as libraries. You know, their games are essentially multiple objects. The unique titles, kind of like rare books, right? There are also books that are very rare or unique for one reason or another. They're because of their association or whatever. So anyway, I would think of the game collection as a library. The archive would be the documentation collection around, game history, game studies, things like that. So that would be developer and company documentation. It might be, by the way, I think an area we have not even mentioned yet is documentation about players, about the communities of players and all of that, which is a very different thing. It involves very different techniques for collecting and preserving that history. The techniques are techniques that are familiar to archivists. Archivists deal with the messy world, and they gather together documentation of all sorts: visual documentation, textual documentation, media, and bring that together to document historical issues and that sort of thing. Both the library and the archive are important. I think, my final thought on that would be this: drawing that distinction is one reason that institutions should be different. That we shouldn't all be doing the same thing. Some institutions are going to be better at building library collections. Some will be better at focusing on what's needed for public exhibition and education. Some will be more focused on archival documentation. I mean, that's more what I'm focused on, say, than building a collection of games, although we do have a collection of games, of course. So I think that just argues for different skill sets, different institutional commitments. None of us have unlimited resources, so we should focus on particular areas, and most important, collaboration among the institutions, so that the work that's done at one institution where we have a Game & Watch collection, we know that exists somewhere. If there may be another institution that happens to have the papers of Nintendo engineers or people who worked on projects like that. Those institutions should be collaborating in some way. The information about collections should be shared. All of that is very important. So I mean, that's what I think about. I have to say, when I see when somebody's doing something completely different from what I'm doing, it's exciting to me. You know, it's not like I feel like, oh, we need to do that too now. You know, I feel like, great, another institution is taking that approach that's different from ours. That's a good thing.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I especially liked how Embracer, with their quite big resources, was also aiming for the collaboration. I think that's a really nice thing. There's definitely something that we can learn from each other. I think this panel already is an important step towards talking more, sharing knowledge, etc. Maybe we could give the voice to Nicole for a while. What do you think about watching the Embracer video? They were talking a lot about the preservation through use, how games should be understood through playing them. Do you agree or do you disagree?
I totally agree. I think it was very interesting to see that they want to make the games accessible, not only to the players, to the public, but also to researchers. That's a very similar approach to us. I'm looking forward for the little exhibition area. I'm not sure how they want to do it, if they want to do it like special exhibitions and change the games, or like they have a permanent exhibition like we have. So yeah, I'm interested in it. I want to see it. I want to go there and visit it. But yeah, I think it's very, very important to make games accessible for school classes, students, teachers. It's very helpful to learn from games. So it's a very important part for us. So I think, yeah, it's interesting to see what they are doing. Yeah.
Maybe another thing that sort of struck me when watching the Embracer video, something that I completely understand, but something that I maybe feel that's interesting that we do a little bit differently, because they're talking about collecting commercially released games, and I think that's a very good goal in itself. But sort of we maybe touched upon this a little bit beforehand already, with Camille talking about the piracy issue, and I think this could be something that we could maybe talk a little bit more about. And I have here with me in the studio some pirated game discs, and I think that, like Henry already mentioned, we kind of, maybe it's sometimes good to see the other ways of dealing with games. Maybe we need to look at the players, and I think looking at pirated discs like the Commodore 64 pirated games kind of gives a new voice to the players themselves, instead of the companies releasing games, the developers. How do you feel about this? Is this something that we should work more towards doing in game museums and archives and libraries nowadays, preserving the players?
Can I?
Please.
Do you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
I think somehow it's a bit different. What you are showing is a bit different. I think we could compare it to, for example, what happened with the tape or with VHS, or that when it started to be accessible to public was to share a game. I even think that the idea was not to pirate the game, but more to share the game. When you're a kid, you don't realize that you had such a possibility that you were doing something bad. The difference with what I was showing just before, it was like more an alternative market. So when you were buying these games, you had no idea you were buying a pirate game, because that was the only games that you had. You didn't have access to the information. It was just there, and it was sold in a shop. So there was no any kind of reflection. Oh, it's very cool. I can play this game here because I can't get it somewhere else. It's just that was the only version of the game you could get. And you didn't have the information from where that game is coming from. But the other main idea that I didn't said before is that it's actually thanks to all these pirate alternative markets that you have a collective memory about video games in world Europe. And if nowadays people can are playing, if Microsoft can sell their Xbox or Sony can sell their PlayStation, it's because the people got access to the games before, thanks to that alternative systems and games. And there is another thing that I wanted to go back that was mentioned before. Was about this relation to the physical copy and the program that can be emulated, and definitely. So maybe it's obvious, and I'm opening already open door, but indeed there is, I think, things that I would like to call probably contemporary folklore or rituals that as well will be very hard to transmit, to share. Like I have when forgot there was one thing about yes. So I had just a simple example, like with the master system, for example. Like it was you cannot preserve the fact that you have to push pause button, which is on the console itself, which is, of course, we could consider as a problem of design conception, but which is part of the history as well. And there was, yes, the example that was mentioned was, for example, the games with voice recognition to recognize the voice in a game. So there is a lot of challenge, and probably one of the options for such kind of things are, I think, for example, YouTube channels where many of that games, many of consoles have been tested and presented, where there is like a demonstration of how such a game or such a machine is working. So it's not like everything will be lost, and but definitely there is a big difference as saving a physical machine, like an hardware, and saving the software digitally. And I think that's what it makes probably maybe the difference between a museum and a library.
Thank you. What about Andrew and Martin? What do you think about putting the focus on the player instead of the games or the materiality of the machines?
Yeah, so I think that's extremely important. I've been taking a lot of notes. I don't want to miss anything too much here. But really, you know, where it starts is with our own personal missions, right? You know, we're looking at video games through the lens of play, you know, knowing that play is important, it's essential. And I think that will ultimately impact exactly what every institution is going to collect, and that's okay. We need more people, and it's not just institutions that need to be doing this. It is the fans out there, the person that, you know, was cited in the Embracer video who collected for 30 years in his basement. Those people are important too. But Henry was right on when mentioning players, because that is definitely a key part. You know, we're looking at the games, we're looking at the companies, we're looking at through the lens of play, but we're also looking at the players as a key part of what we're doing. You know, and there's tons of ways, as Henry was mentioning, to look at that through things like interviews with players, magazines. We actually started to look at what we're calling digital communities, things like the speedrunning community. How do we preserve their aspect of play and what that means, which is very different than a Let's Play on YouTube, which is very different than, you know, my 4-year-old playing Mario Kart at home. It's a different type of play that, you know, one is not more important than the other, but they all have different methods that we have to look at and how we're preserving those things, including, you know, the piracy. We have piracy tools and that sort of thing. You know, mentioning the buttons, you know, there's a few DS games that you have to actually physically fold the screen, but then they stopped doing that because the 2DS and all that came with that. And really how these collections are built, whether you're looking at the players or you're just looking at retail games, whatever that may be, it goes back to the mission and who your audience is. You know, prior to COVID, we had nearly 600,000 guests at the museum. So a big part of the people that we're serving are the people coming to the museum, and we hope to have that over 1 million. But it's increasingly online, and what are those materials that they want to look at, and how are they going to look at those things? We find that, you know, even though we too have collections of complete collections for certain platforms, including all Nintendo home consoles through the GameCube, specifically Japanese, same with Sega, same with NEC systems. We're finding increasingly that that's just not what our audience, whether that's the guests or our researchers, are looking at. You need to have the games, right? There's something about seeing Pac-Man. There's something about seeing that. But the researchers who are coming are looking at our archival material, looking at how games are made, looking at that player reaction. It's very rare that I'm setting something up in my lab just to have somebody play it to want to experience it as it was, you know, in the sense that they just want to sit down and play it. They're looking at something different. They're looking at character representation in the game, and they want to see it on the original. They want to see it on a CRT. So even when they're playing games, it's interesting to know that who the player is, what they're playing, is also a whole different avenue that we have to think about, and it's becoming increasingly important as, you know, you have things like YouTube that are quite different than just me playing a game on my own.
Thank you. So we're moving on to our next video, pre-recorded thing from Korea, from Nexon, but maybe we give Martin a really short comment at this point, if you want to comment on the discussion so far.
Yeah, thank you, because my notes are getting bigger and bigger, and now I can erase it. Just wanted to add that history of the object is very the story what we can tell after sometimes. No, we can, if we see the digital development or the objects are getting not rescued at some point, but we can always tell the story of the object. And we have, for example, a very nice thing. It was an iPhone which we got from an IT partner, and it had a sticker from the museum from the beginning on it. So that made us really clear how the objects are getting a story on its own, like they are developing a story, and you can tell that, and by that you get to the gamer and to the person which is playing it, and get to the history. Where was this object? Everybody was recreating the living rooms on the 70s or children's room as in part of the exhibition, and that somebody is sitting there. It's not about the furniture. It's about the person which is sitting in this room or was sitting in this room, and showing like an ordinary everyday culture history. So this was all just what I wanted. And sharing, I see the part. It's very important. We also got the connection with the Embracer group because they are got the hands on an SU-2000, which was a VR machine from the 90s, and it didn't go far now because it's still new and fresh, the connection, and we are trying to get the information out about that. Maybe we can intensify that because it's the beginning, and then Embracer users knew what was popping out, and it started with a big collection which was wow, and a private one from a private company. So there are a lot of questions. The video answered a lot of them. Thank you.
Great. Let's move on to the video from Nexon, Computer Museum.
안녕하세요. 넥슨 컴퓨터 박물관 최윤아입니다. 핀란드 게임 박물관의 6번째 생일을 진심으로 축하합니다. 2023년은 넥슨 컴퓨터 박물관의 10주년이 되는 해이기도 한데요. 그간 박물관이 진행해온 온라인 게임의 아카이빙 중 3가지를 영상으로 소개해드리고자 합니다. 2013년 7월 넥슨 컴퓨터 박물관은 개관하면서 넥슨의 시작이자 세계에서 가장 오랫동안 서비스 중인 그래픽 MMORPG로 기네스북에 등재가 되어 있는 온라인 게임 바람의 나라를 복원하겠다는 계획을 발표했습니다. 바람의 나라는 1994년부터 개발을 시작하여 1996년 정식 서비스를 시작했습니다. 그래서 이 프로젝트의 이름이 바람의 나라 1996입니다. 모든 디지털 콘텐츠는 기술의 변화에 따라 데이터 형식과 저장 방식이 달라집니다. 당연히 바람의 나라도 30여 년간의 업데이트를 거치는 동안 플레이 환경뿐만 아니라 개발 방식도 변화해왔습니다. 이러한 온라인 게임을 단순히 영상이나 이미지로 기록하기보다는 온라인 게임의 본질에 가까운 방식으로 복원하는 방법을 고민했습니다. 바람의 나라 1996 프로젝트의 출발점이 바로 거기에 있었습니다. 이는 온라인 게임을 어떻게 아카이빙할 것인가에 대한 박물관이 던지는 질문이기도 합니다. 바람의 나라 1996은 실제 소스코드뿐 아니라 유의미한 시점의 플레이를 당시의 기술력으로 복원하고자 하였고, 최종적으로 리버스 엔지니어링을 통해 과거의 핵심 기능 중의 일부를 이제는 하나의 유물이 되어버린 어셈블리어로 복원하기로 하였습니다. 이는 박물관 개관을 계기로 바람의 나라 원작자부터 초기 개발자들이 모두 모여 적극적으로 참여했기에 가능했습니다. 약 1년의 시간을 거쳐 2014년 NDC에서 복원의 과정과 함께 성공을 발표했고, 이후 박물관에서는 물론이고 박물관 홈페이지와 바람의 나라 홈페이지에서 무료로 다운로드를 받아 자유롭게 플레이할 수 있도록 하였습니다. 발표 당시 2달 동안 약 6만 건 이상의 다운로드가 될 정도로 국내에서 바람의 나라 1996 복원 사례는 큰 이슈가 되었습니다. 바람의 나라 출시 이후 지금까지 온라인 게임은 대한민국의 게임 산업을 주도하고 있고 이제는 30년을 바라보고 있습니다. 넥슨 컴퓨터 박물관은 2019년 25주년을 맞이한 대한민국 온라인 게임을 재조명하는 전시로 게임을 게임하다 /invite U를 개최하였습니다. 지금의 온라인 게임은 개발자가 만든 가상세계에 플레이어의 참여가 더해지고 그들이 만들어 놓은 데이터를 분석하고 대응하는 기술인 인공지능이 함께 플레이를 하고 있으며, 여기에는 공동체의 역사이면서 동시에 지극히 개인적인 서사가 함께 담겨 있습니다. 전시는 이러한 게임 속 가상세계를 탐험하는 시선과 반대로 현실에서 객관적으로 게임을 바라보는 시선을 교차하며 관람할 수 있도록 구성하였습니다. 그리고 온라인 게임을 과거에 즐겼거나 지금 즐기고 있는, 그리고 앞으로 즐기게 될 모두를 초대하고자 했습니다. 그래서 전시의 제목이 게임을 게임하다 /invite U입니다. 관람객은 온라인 게임을 플레이하는 것처럼 로그인과 로그아웃 과정을 거치며 넥슨의 대표 게임 IP를 기반으로 하는 19개의 작품을 체험할 수 있고, 인터랙션을 통해 자신의 관람 데이터를 축적하게 됩니다. 넥슨 플레이어의 경우 관람 데이터와 함께 넥슨 ID와 연동하여 그간의 넥슨 게임의 플레이 데이터를 영수증 형태로 시각화한 아카이빙 자료를 출력해서 가지고 갈 수 있습니다. 이 전시는 2019년 레드닷 디자인 어워드 브랜드 앤 커뮤니케이션 부분에서 수상을 하기도 하였습니다. 가상 공간의 게임을 오프라인 공간에 구현했던 전시는 종료 이후 다시 온라인 공간으로 옮겨 계속 이어지고 있습니다. 언제든 누구나 홈페이지에 접속을 하면 가상전시 체험과 함께 관람 데이터와 넥슨 게임의 플레이 데이터를 확인할 수 있습니다. 넥슨 컴퓨터 박물관은 대한민국 온라인 게임의 25년의 역사를 122개의 주요 게임들의 연대기로 정의하였습니다. 이 게임들은 모두 출시라는 과정을 거쳐 우리의 손에 닿게 된 게임들입니다. 그러나 우리가 만나는 게임들의 이면에는 개발자들의 열정과 시간이 담긴 수많은 미출시 게임들이 존재합니다. 여러분은 세상에 없는 게임을 해본 적이 있습니까? 이번에 소개하는 레포지토리는 넥슨과 리포지토리를 결합한 단어로 넥슨의 미출시 게임의 전시 타이틀이자 동시에 이후에도 지속될 넥슨 아카이빙 프로젝트의 이름입니다. 레포지토리는 박물관 관람객에게만 접근 권한이 허락된 넥슨 아카이빙 공간입니다. 이는 국내외에서 유례가 없는 전시로 신작을 출시하기 위한 개발자들의 치열한 노력과 시도를 조명하고 기록합니다. 여기에는 짧게는 수개월, 길게는 6, 7년 가까이 개발되었으나 정식 출시로 이어지지 않은 미출시 게임을 공개하고 있습니다. 레포지토리에서 박물관은 저장소의 안내자로서 파편화된 자료들을 수집하고 정리하여 재구성하였고, 관람객들은 개발 중단이라는 이름으로 데이터로만 남겨져 있던 게임의 제작 과정을 들여다보거나 플레이어로 직접 체험할 수 있습니다. 여기에 기록된 무수한 가능성과 아이디어가 가까운 미래에 플레이어 손에서 새로운 재미로 다시 탄생하길 기대해봅니다.
짧은 시간이었지만 넥슨 컴퓨터 박물관이 온라인 게임의 가치와 역사를 보존하기 위해 노력을 지속적으로 하고 있다는 점이 잘 전달되었길 바랍니다. 감사합니다.
So thank you so much to Nexon Computer Museum for providing this very interesting video about their work with games. And we are getting close to the end of our panel, and it's been a really, really interesting discussion so far. But I still want to sort of connect a little bit with the ideas and the project they're doing at the Nexon Computer Museum. And I would like to again start with Henry. I know you have a long history of working with virtual worlds like Second Life. What do you think about the Nexon approach to preserving virtual worlds?
Yeah, I have to say, I found out about their Kingdom of the Winds project a few years ago, and I've talked to them a little bit about it. That is the hardest game preservation project to do. An online multiplayer game, you are dealing with all of the difficulties of software as a service, preserving that kind of model of a game that's constantly updated. Also a game that where you have the problem, this is a problem we dealt with in the Preserving Virtual Worlds projects, you have the problem of, let's say, preserving a game perfectly, this kind of game. But if there's no community actively playing that game, what are you going to do in there? You walk around and you basically can experience the space, kind of like take a walk through it, perhaps, something like that. But the games are dependent on the community, and they were able to, I'm not sure how many people are playing it now, but when I was seeing the original presentations about it, there was a fairly active community of people actually in the game. So they were able to some extent to even get to observe a community within that space. Of course, not the original community. That's another question to talk about. But still, that was the thing about the Nexon Museum that really impressed me, was that they went after the most difficult problem, and because of their connection to Nexon, obviously the developer and their access to things like source code and such. I love that remark in the video where she says, this sort of obsolete thing called assembly language, that that made me once again feel like a elder statesman, I guess, to see that that's the way people talk about assembly language. So they were in a good situation to go after that problem, but it still must have been an extremely difficult thing, and it's very impressive that they were able to put that together, make it look so good, and even see players activating that world to some extent. So it's a great project, and it's something, again, like I said before, it's different from what other people were doing, and so it's good to see that. And now we have that project as a reference point for that kind of work.
Yeah, thank you for the comments. Really insightful. I would also like to still ask a question from Nicole. We heard that the Nexon is working with exhibitions and databases about unpublished games. What do you think about that? Is that something that would interest you and the Computerspielemuseum?
I think it's super interesting that they're doing this. It's not really our approach at the moment, but yeah, it's super important work. I think it's also very interesting that they are exhibiting these unfinished projects, because students can come over there, see how other developers are working. So it's a very important educational program. I think for us, the problem is that we don't have enough space to exhibit this. At the moment, we are working with some students and some universities, so they come to us, they talk about their projects. But usually we just preserve the finished games or the published games. So I think it's very interesting to see that they are preserving also unfinished projects. So yeah, I think that's something we can think about in the future, but I'm not sure if we can have the space to exhibit it like they do. So, but yeah, it's a very nice and interesting project.
Thank you so much. So we still have 2 videos to look at, and we have a video from the archives of the Ritsumeikan Center for Game Studies, and we have a short video from the Gautam Sen Board Games Museum in Kolkata, India. And I would like to close with those, but before we do that, we still have some time for closing remarks from our panelists, and I would like to ask you to keep it short this time. What do you think is, what have we learned from this fairly short panel? What are the takeaways? Where are we heading with the game preservation? Any closing remarks?
Yeah, then maybe I start. It was very interesting to meet the people here, and I learned a lot that we have to really work on our focuses. Like Andrew said, we have to focus on our main, what we can do and what we can do very good. And from Andrew, I take always the information now. We have to change maybe the perspective how to preserve. Yeah, it will be very difficult because we met also the museum in the Netherlands, which at the approach that the developer decides which version goes to the archive, and he says that's the version 1.6, and it's I gave you, and you can do whatever you want with it, and you can show it and whatever, and he decides. And in our museum we decide which version we are collecting and it's also a history of luck what we get as a donation, but we decide it, and it's very important, and we have to take it in every discussion now that maybe we can have to look on other ways to preserve games. That's very important for us now, or for me now. And what I want to show, throw in the version of the immersion, the word immersion. How can you show an immersive way of the online games which were preserved? Can we show it somehow how their feeling was, and to play as a group, to play as an instant, how you can play it? And it's very difficult to show it in an immersive way, and maybe there's a way, but we didn't find it yet to show it how Fortnite was 10 years or 3 or 4 years ago, and today it's also very different. You have different acts of gaming and different modules which didn't exist years ago. Yeah? It's a very difficult question. Thank you.
Thank you
for the invite.
Thank you so much. Any closing comments from the others?
Yes. So unfortunately, I was not able to see the World Cup as my setup is not was not practical for that. But to come back on what was mentioned after that. Definitely. So there is, of course, this idea of the ongoing process, and I think the problematic of what should be preserved, I think, is very interesting, and all the side, yes, materials and all the side setup, as was just mentioned, for example, like LAN games or online games, of course, will be hard. But there is another, I think, sensitive topic is about art, and as video games is interactive design, this enlarge very much. Like if there is many artists as well producing artworks using video games. So that's the role of the museum or the institution showing such installations, but I think the technical challenge are very similar to what everyone's are doing there. There is, I think, some steps moving in a way that there is the ZKM in Karlsruhe, which is art center museum about new technology, art and philosophy. That Niklas, I think now from that they are now they included they are part of FGAMP, But yes, there is some challenge as well with, I'm thinking about the MoMA in New York that are collecting video games, but in interactive design and architecture. So yes, this idea of preserving games as well is, I think is only a beginning. Even like I know that there is people now working for 40 years of preserving, working on that questions, and there is many other new challenge coming on, and I think it's just a part of it. So I hope I was not too much off-road. But,
no, it's perfectly fine. Thank you so much, Camille, and it was really a pleasure to see the pirated machines you brought to the panel. Thank you so much. So maybe we move on to Andrew. Any closing comments, remarks?
Sure, I'll make it quick. I mean, we've asked as many questions as we've given answers and information to everyone online today. You know, what is preservation was one of the questions we talked about in some ways. But really what this represents, this panel, anytime we do this sort of thing, is this is showcasing that video game preservation is a worldwide effort. We need more people, more research, more money, resources, more developers, more institutions of all kind all over the world doing this sort of thing. But I think we're in a better place than we've ever been. I feel like we're also working on many of the issues that took some other industries, forms of entertainment, many more years, many more decades to even begin to grasp. I think this highlights that we're not alone. We can do all of this stuff together, and that together we can preserve the most complete picture of what video games are, what they were, and what they're going to be. So thank you for everybody being here today. This has been great.
Thank you so much. The chat has been also, the Twitch chat has been super active. It's mostly in Finnish, but there's been lots and lots of comments. No direct questions to any of you, but people have been sort of feeling what you're talking about and enjoying the comments and enjoying the discussions. And I think that's a very, very nice sign. But I guess without further ado, I would like to thank you very much. Thank you for taking the time in the middle of the night, especially Henry and Andrew. That really feels great that you took the effort to do this. We will now close with two videos, one from Japan, the Ritsumekan, and another one from India. But thank you, everybody.
はい。それでは、立命館大学ゲーム研究センターのアーカイブについて簡単に説明をさせていただきたいと思います。今ご覧になられているこちらの方はですね、ゲーム研究センターが持っているゲームのアーカイブになります。ゲームアーカイブの方ですね、いろいろな形でされてるんですけども、ここの部屋に大体、ものとして置いてありまして、大体ゲームソフトが、家庭用ゲームが中心なんですけれども、1万本ちょっと。あとハードウェアがですね、ゲームのハードですね。そちらが100少々ございます。で、その上でですね、ゲームの雑誌などいろいろ取り揃えておりますが、まずここの棚から簡単に説明させていただきたいと思います。こちらの棚、見ていただくとわかりますように、国内のですね、非常に古いゲームハードからですね、比較的最近のものまでいろいろと揃えております。ゲームハードといったときに、ファミコンからゲームハードをご存知の方が多いと思うんですけれども、それ以前にもですね、例えば任天堂さんでも、テレビゲーム6だとか、ブロック崩しといったものを1970年代に出しておりまして、そういったものをアーカイブをしたりしております。他にも、若干マイナーというか、メジャーな、国民機と言われるような形にはならなかったようなゲームハードもたくさんありまして、こういったバーチャルボーイなどは比較的知られているものですけれども、こういったものとかですね、こちらはですね、プレイディアですね。これ1990年代に出されたものになります。こちらがですね、ゲームの雑誌の保存をしているところになります。ファミコン通信、いわゆるファミ通ですね。といったものが、たくさんここに、保存されていると こちらファミ通が、大体棚全面に展開されておりまして、IO であるとか、マイコンベーシックマガジン、そういった、パソコンのプログラム投稿誌とこういったようなものですとか、そういった雑誌が果たしてきた役割というのはかなりありますので、そういったものも含めて保存しております。はい。こちらがですね、立命館大学ゲーム研究センターで、任天堂さんとですね、契約を結んで作らせていただいた、ゲームというかファミコンのですね、ハードエミュレーターになります。こちらここにカセットを挿してですね、ドンキーコングなどのゲームが、いくつか遊べるんですけれども、こういったハードウェアエミュレーターはですね、ソフトエミュレーターと区別するんですが、ソフトエミュレーターと違う点として、特有のバグであるだとか、特有のズレみたいな、そういったものをですね、再現することができるという点で、当時の環境に極めて近い形で、ゲームできるというようなものになっております。それですね、こちらの方がゲームソフトを保存している箱の方になります。で、ゲームソフトを保存しているといった場合、こういった物理的にですね、集めるということをやっているわけですけれども、こういったものを物理的に集めるというだけではなく、これをどういった形でデータとして管理しやすいようにしていくかというようなことも同時にやっておりまして、例えばこちらにですね、ファイナルファンタジー5、あるいはファイナルファンタジー6というものがありますが、これがシリーズであるということをどうやって登録していくか、あるいはこれ同じものを2つ手に入ったときに、これをどうやって区別していくかというようなことも含めては、データベースの中で管理するというようなことを続けております。こういった部屋のですね、運用にあたって、温度ですとか湿度といったもののコントロールも非常に重要になってきますので、こういったサーキュレーターでですね、空気が滞留しないように回していたり、温湿度計で、状況をなるべく一定に保つというようなことをやっております。
Welcome to the Gautam Sen Board Games Museum. And this is probably the only such museum in this part of the world, that is South Asia. We have games ranging from ancient Indian games, and you can see the Ganjifa cards here, to games from all over the world, both for local and global audiences. We also have a range of modern games. This is for an audience or a group of people who haven't looked at so many board games earlier.
The museum is named after my father, Gautam Sen, who was an avid chess player, and we have a chess collection in his memory.